Today we're taking a look back at the 2024 election night. Highlights from MSNBC. Let's watch as they try and talk themselves out of depression as the night slowly and obviously goes towards Mr. Trump. You're going to see a lot of coping, a lot of excuses, a lot of expert analysis. Let's get to it.
Bernanke's entered the room. I don't know if he's ready to talk to us yet. Are we ready? Okay, let's bring in the man of the hour, the man of the night, the man of hopefully not the whole week, Steve Bernanke.
Yeah, Nicole. So what we got here is we call this the first wave of exit polls. They're starting to come in, and I got to give the disclaimer, but it's very important. These exit polls are still being conducted in the battleground states. A lot of them are being conducted in non-Eastern time zone states. So what we have here, first of all, is very big picture, what I'm about to show you. And also, a lot of these numbers are subject to change. There's going to be subsequent waves of exit polls that come out through the night.
Yeah, he's basically saying this means nothing. All this information means nothing. And it's ridiculous. And just please watch us because we want views.
So again, we're inside of an hour till we get to those first initial poll closings. We'll certainly get a lot more clarity with the actual results. But between now and then, maybe to whet your appetite, we can just look at 30,000 feet here at a few things. That is not at all where I wanted to go with that.
He's preparing for defeat.
The most important issue, we asked folks, single most important issue. And right now, this is what's coming through in the exit poll nationally. Again, still being conducted. State of democracy was the most cited. This is, again, we give a list of issues to voters and we ask them.
The state of democracy
most important is a little bit more than a third there.
Is the most important issue.
Democracy. Just behind that is the economy.
Just the way that's a little further. Just the way that's worded, you know, this is a completely liberal biased poll. Just the way they say the state of democracy. And in fact, I would argue the conservatives have much more of an argument to be concerned about the state of democracy because of the last 4 years. It's been quite scary, looking kind of like we're going down a slippery little slope there. But you can tell the way they worded that.
Back here, 14% is abortion. Immigration is 11%, 4% on foreign policy. So you can think of all the different stories, all the different controversies that have gone into those issues. But the election that we're looking at so far,
I can't buy that the state of democracy would outweigh the economy. Who did they poll? It's so ridiculous, these freaking polls.
Kamala Harris, of course, is part of the Biden administration. She's the vice president. He was initially running. She's still part of the administration. Does that create...
He just had to tell everybody. He's like, hey, kids, just so you remember, Kamala is currently the vice president. She's actually in the administration. It's kind of a big deal. It's like nobody knows who she is.
Headwinds for her with this election. So we ask again, Joe Biden's approval rating. Folks, we've got so far in the exit poll a couple different categories here, but strongly and somewhat approve. That's a 40%. I don't know if you can read that's a little light, but that's a 40% approval rating that Joe Biden has right now. Again, that's kind of consistent with what
is
we've
it though? Somewhat approve.
40s. It's what scared Democrats about having him.
I can't believe the guy has 40% approval.
Disapprove 40%, nearly 60%.
Again,
that's what we're getting
of
now.
What that guy's been doing.
Consistent with what the polling has been showing him. Can also just show you this, asking folks, what time did they make up their minds in this thing? Was it recent? Was it long ago? A lot happened in the last week. Has that been on people's minds?
Was it before Biden was elected?
And you can see right here, 92% are telling us that it was more than a week ago that they made up their minds in this thing. Only 7% saying in the last week. Now, in a close race, that 7% can be crucial. But I think one of the bigger takeaways here, it's been a while. I think a lot of people have been kind of locked in and waiting for this moment, potentially, Nicole. So, again, that's about 30,000 feet with all the disclaimers. It's about to get real soon enough, but we wanted to share that with you.
What's so interesting, Alicia, is that the campaign's theory of the case was if the stakes could be elevated in the minds of voters, that if people understood our very democracy was on the line, that they would do better. And I think that's the first time I've seen the democracy on par with the economy as a top issue.
And you and I looked at each other and said we were both surprised by that democracy number being quite so large, even with all the disclaimers that we offered. But I also think there's the possibility that some folks who are motivated
maybe
by
that's
dogs
because you guys have been screaming every day on your channels that democracy is at stake here. That there's going to be an authoritarian dictator. There's basically Trump's going to be a dictator and just kill everyone. I mean, maybe that's because you've been saying that on the air forever.
that a functioning democracy is necessary in order to protect some of those fundamental rights. Right. Since we've sort of poo-pooed the exit polls, or at least put our disclaimers in, let's talk about the fact that that comes on the heels of us questioning polls throughout this process, right? That you look at Wisconsin, 2022, Roe versus Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court. Then abortion just stops. Abortion access stops in Wisconsin. They're doing polling. Democrats are feeling good. Even their own polling was not capturing the number of voters who were newly animated by this issue, or the extent to which it was the issue that was able to move Republicans voters to Democrats. It was the issue that moved swing voters to Democrats. It was the issues that got voters off the couch. So I agree with you and you, that we're going to continue to see that as we look at all of these results.
Now, I think people care more about their wallets. You know what I mean?
Go back on something I just said 10 seconds ago. I'm going to completely go back on what I said.
This dude's look is awesome.
Because I'm going to read too much into the exit polling. And it's wrong.
I wish I could pull that off.
Do it anyway.
Okay.
It's all we have right now.
It's a safe space, Cornell. You do you.
Thank you. That makes me feel good. Thanks for seeing me. If you look at the last midterm election, and on the question, there were several questions about what's the most important issue, what are the issues you're voting on. If you look at the voters who were most animated about democracy, Democrats, at least in the congressional battlegrounds, Democrats won those voters by better than 20 points.
Yeah.
Again, you should throw away early exit voting, but I got to tell you right now, if that's such a big issue, and given what I think historically Democrats have won that by, it's a very good sign for Democrats.
Is Steve Kornacki still here in the studio? I mean, I think a question, too, is that I've not seen democracy on par with the economy among a general electorate.
And I still don't believe it.
I mean, that's kind of made me gasp. I mean, and because it was the campaign's theory of the case all along, that if the stakes could be raised and if the viewers understood kind of what all of us who marinated in it every day, who understand what it means to call back into active duty General Stanley McChrystal so that you could court-martial him. I mean, I worked in the White House and I had to follow that. I mean, but the voters are so informed and they're so smart. And in this election, they're waiting 3 hours to vote. That's also a vote that's not in there yet.
Voters are so informed and so
smart. Right now to vote.
Maybe it's something you told me a long time ago, and you said when you were at Bush, it's like, we're going to define what the race is going to be about. And maybe they've done a pretty good job of defining what the race is going to be about.
Well, actually, you know, that was an Aaron Sorkin line, too. That was Annette Bening saying on Election Day, people care about what I tell them to care about. And I think in this case...
I thought it was you.
No, it was me. It's always me quoting...
Great artist.
It's always me quoting somebody else. I sit down every day with a page of quotes. But it does suggest that sometimes events are so massive, and Dobbs may be that event that is so massive. Other times campaigns do a very skillful job at pushing issues forward, and it suggests that this campaign has done both. Realize the massive nature of Dobbs and the reaction that people don't talk about and go public with.
Yeah, they've done an incredible job.
Miscarriages or losses or health implications, but also the messages that were pushed out on democracy got through.
I think it's also, I mean, one of the things that's tricky about these exit polls when you ask somebody what's the most important issue, it's like, you know, if you get asked that, well, I put, you know, the economy is a little above this, but my third thing doesn't really matter to me at all. I'm really voting on these two. It's a very blunt instrument, right? That does not take anything away from it. And I think Alicia said something that's profound and true, which is that for a lot of voters, I think there are going to be a lot of voters who are going to have said in this set are going to have said abortion and democracy are kind of the same thing, that they think the Supreme Court is in the worst standing that's been in a very long time. It is seen as a corrupt...
Ever, since the question's been asked by Gallup.
And it is seen particularly as a corrupt institution. And so the corruption of the Supreme Court is a democracy issue.
Really?
This
corrupt,
campaign
huh?
Was
on which side?
Really on two things. Donald and Dobbs. And in the broadest sense, meaning women's health, broadly defined. Dobbs is as a placeholder for that, not just abortion rights, but women's reproductive health and women's health more broadly. And Donald Trump. And they snap together because people think that Trump is personally responsible for endangering women's health. But Donald, when you say we're campaigning on Donald, unfit, unhinged, unchecked power, those are all just code. Democracy is the pleasant way we say that.
These people are so crazy with the whole abortion thing. Look, they put it back to the states, which is not a crazy or authoritarian thing to do.
We have eyes on Howard University right now. We can tell you that Vice President Harris is not expected to speak tonight, but we are seeing quite a crowd there, and we are expecting, we're within the 2-minute warning from a statement that we're expecting from the Harris campaign co-chair Cedric Richmond. Cedric Richmond expected to address this crowd at Howard momentarily. Again, we don't expect to be hearing from Vice President Harris. But I think, actually, if we can go to this live so we can hear the Natsat here, so we can hear Cedric Richmond and what he's going to say.
So they project Trump wins Georgia. Here comes their little spokesman.
This is live from Howard University in Washington, D.C.
This guy's like, oh my gosh, this sucks.
Good evening, Howard. Good evening, HU. I want to say good evening to all of the Harris campaign, the campaign family. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for being here.
Oh, he's cracking a little bit.
Thank you for believing in the promise of America.
Mm-hmm.
We still have votes to count.
Ooh.
We still have states that have not been called yet.
Yeah,
we will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the vice president tonight.
What?
But you will hear from her tomorrow. She will be back here tomorrow to address not only the HU family, not only to address her supporters, but to address the nation. So thank you. We believe in you. May God bless you. May God keep you. And go HU and go Harris. Thank you all.
A short and to-the-point statement from Cedric Richmond, the Harris campaign co-chair, speaking to what is still a considerable crowd at Howard University.
She's talking about
in
the crowd.
Washington, D.C. You now see them turn as one to
What
start
an
to leave the
incredible
grounds.
crowd.
They're letting the crowd assembled there for the Harris campaign
like 1,000 people?
For in
most of
support
it's
Vice
press
President
over
Harris,
there. Yeah,
letting everybody know that she's not going to be speaking on any subject over the course of this evening. Cedric Richmond saying we still have votes to count. We still have states that have not been called yet. You will not hear from her tonight, but he did say that you will hear from her tomorrow. I think indicating that she may be speaking from Howard tomorrow, both addressing HU, Howard University, but also addressing the nation.
Yeah, nobody knows. They didn't say.
I just wanted to sort of re-emphasize a point that Lawrence made before that speech about where we stand tonight. We're looking at a map that appears to show somewhere in the national 3 or 4 point swing from 2020 towards the Republican Party. We have called the Senate for the Republican Party. That they were always favored to take the Senate, given the map, so it's not hugely surprising. There is a weird wrinkle here, which is the House of Representatives. Now, in 2016, of course, when Donald Trump won that race, despite losing the national popular vote, he won the White House, the Senate, and a House majority. He had a trifecta. When Joe Biden won in 2020, he had the Senate and the House, a trifecta, thanks to those 2 Georgia runoffs. It is a genuine possibility that should Donald Trump win the presidency, which is not yet called, the Senate is called for Republicans, the Democrats take back the House.
This guy has an ambiguous...
from Republicans. This is not like crazy talk. This is not like some, it's 1 in the morning and I'm punchy. Like, mathematically, based on what we know so far, based on the flips we have, that is genuinely an outstanding possibility. That could be massively consequential in ways that I cannot overemphasize.
And we're going to have to, as we start to see House races get called, and as we watch for additional flips and ads, we're going to have to talk about those consequences over the course of this night. You're not going to get away with it, with leaving without talking about those consequences. But before we leave Howard University, I want to go actually to MSNBC's Michelle Norris, who's at Howard University for us, who just saw those remarks from Cedric Richmond. We saw the reaction from the crowd from that aerial or that high-mounted shot in terms of people turning and leaving. Cedric Richmond, Michelle, making clear that the vice president will not be speaking tonight. Nobody should be waiting to hear anything from her. But it does sound like, was I right in understanding what Cedric Richmond was saying, that she will be back at Howard tomorrow to make remarks both to Howard and to the nation?
Yes, you heard that right. The crowd, you can probably see behind me the rush to the exits. I mean, as soon as he said that, people turned on their heels and they were out of here. The evening was getting increasingly somber as people realized what this map is looking like. He did indicate that she would be back tomorrow to speak to people here and to speak to the nation. That, of course, is a logistical nightmare on several levels because the university was not expecting her to come back tomorrow. I don't know how large the crowd will be. There are a lot of unknowns in that statement. I do know that there was a lot of hand-wringing and consternation in her camp about when she should leave, about when she should start to head here. And her victory party, which was in another part of town, at what point they turned off the TV set and just piped up the music because the room was starting to get increasingly somber. So a lot of people here, I haven't had a chance to talk to people who express disappointment. Now, there really is still a lot of people who are holding on to hope, trying hard to hold on to hope.
Keep holding.
But the numbers, it's hard to do that in the face of a map that really looks like it's presenting a very steep challenge, and a country that at this point is still very divided.
And to be clear, Michelle, NBC News has called 2 of the 7 swing states.
Divided, but it's a pretty
Georgia
dominant
and North Carolina
map.
For Donald Trump. They've also called Senate control for the Republican Party. 5 swing states remain to be called. But as you say, the internal map, which we have been following with Steve Kornacki, the wins in Georgia and North Carolina have created the mood that you're describing. The last thing that we have reportable from the Harris campaign, the top of the Harris campaign, Manager
like
General
right
Molly
side
Dillon
of her face.
said, we always knew it was going to be down to the blue wall.
Yeah,
the blue wall is still
she talks to the right
at this point. But it sounds like the Harris campaign is sort of keeping things tight in terms of whether or not they're going to string people along into thinking this is going to happen.
And in that note that Jen O'Malley Dillon sent out earlier, there was an indication there, if you noted, that came out, a little more than an hour ago. And she was telling people at that point, get some sleep. We'll continue to count these votes, and we'll be back at this in the morning.
Yes, that's right.
Everybody
Michelle
go
Norris,
to bed.
I imagine, are not freeing you to go sleep anytime soon. I imagine we may be back with you yet. But thank you for being there for us. It's much appreciated. Seeing Cedric Richmond come out and make those remarks at Howard, you can see how it could be different, right? You can see how they could expect that to be the candidate.
Pretty somber.
I think they planned for everything in terms of, it's close, or Harris is ahead, but Trump declares victory. I mean, all these things that everybody gamed out. Now, while we're just waiting for the blue wall states to come in and watching the math, sending people home is also like asking people to conserve their emotional energy, I think.
And it's not possible. I mean, I think there's no other way to describe how people are feeling leaving that venue and people on the campaign than deflated in this moment. Yes, all of the other states have not been called. But what they went to that venue tonight hoping to see and witness was a historic election of Kamala Harris to the presidency, was the end of the Trump era as they knew it. And so we don't know the outcome yet, but that is not what they are receiving. And they are being told to go home and wait till tomorrow.
The Biden era.
A lot of people don't know this, but if you have a Zillow app on your phone.
NBC News can project that there is a winner in the Senate race in Ohio. This is a Republican pickup. This is incumbent Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown losing his seat to Republican challenger Bernie Moreno in Ohio. NBC News can also project an interesting Senate result in California. Now, this is Adam Schiff, the Democratic candidate in California, is projected to have won this seat. I need to tell you, though, he wins this both in terms of the regular Senate contest, but he also wins the special, which means that the seat that was vacated by the death of Dianne Feinstein, where LaFonza Butler has been in that seat since Dianne Feinstein's death, Adam Schiff will not only take over the full term of that seat, he will also take this seat immediately in the Senate from California. One additional call in New Mexico, the Senate race in New Mexico. NBC News projects that incumbent Democratic Senator Martin Heinrich will be returning to the U.S. Senate. At this hour, this is the balance of power in the United States Senate. And this was a big one because this means a +2 net gain for the Republicans. They are now at 49 seats. Democrats are at 39 seats. There are 12 seats uncalled.
Republicans are ahead.
We've got to go in a moment. We're going to go to Michelle Norris, who is at Harris campaign headquarters at Howard University. Lawrence, I just wanted to get your reaction to that Senate news.
Yeah, that is a big loss for the Democrats. It takes them down in terms of the incumbencies as of this hour to 49 in the Democrats in the Senate. If you were to assume everyone returns, John Tester was in even more trouble than Sherrod Brown, and so most senators believe that Sherrod Brown had a better chance of getting reelected than John Tester. So if John Tester goes the way of Sherrod Brown, that would absolutely guarantee that they lose control of the Senate, because the remaining hope is that Nebraska sends an independent senator to the Senate who would then vote for the Democrats in organizing the Senate, which would get them to 50. But this does now look like the Senate is probably going to be in Republican control.
Yeah, I will also just say it's a loss for the Senate to lose Sherrod Brown, who is
incredible loss. And he was one of those miracle workers politically of the Senate who could go back to a state.
Heck of a word.
Where no other Democrat could win statewide, and he figured out how to do it and do it repeatedly.
Yeah, long after his state turned very.
But they poured massive amounts of money into Ohio against him this time.
Yeah,
just massive.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. Yes. Exactly. Looking at the overall map, the road to 270. Right now, Donald Trump stands at 230 electoral votes. Kamala Harris stands at 185. Again, of the 7 swing states that we and everybody else has been watching, we now have an NBC News call in the first one, Joy. North Carolina called for Donald Trump.
Yep. And so it was,
swing state.
It's a state that I think Democrats definitely were reaching for. There was a lot of work to try to turn out the college campuses, which were really thick and really packed, and try to turn out the suburbs. And I think there was a lot of hope because of just the insanity, can we say fairly, of the person who's running for governor in that state, and a thought that, defeating him would also carry Harris in. But in the end, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears happened in that state. Is that if you can't flip enough white women, and we've talked about this on this set numerous times, is that you have a state where you've got a 6-week abortion or a 12-week abortion. I think theirs might be 12 weeks. Yep. But it's a state where women lost their reproductive rights, where there was a very heavy push to get women to focus on not putting in place, re-electing, putting back into the White House the person who was responsible for taking those rights away and restoring them. But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy. And, God bless Shannon Watts, who has tried to have that conversation. But if people aren't receptive to it, and if people vote more party line or more on race than on gender and on protecting their gender, there's really not much more that you can do but tell people what the risks are and leave it to them to do the right thing.
Steph?
People didn't have any surprises here. We do have to remember, when it comes to North Carolina, they just went through the hurricane. We know that the state made tons of accommodations and people were able to get to the polls in an abbreviated form. But they also were victims to a huge amount of misinformation over the last 4 weeks. You cannot underestimate the impact that had.
Really?
But to Joy's point, there's no surprises in this election.
Like the misinformation of the horrendous job FEMA did, how they diverted massive amounts of funds away from things like FEMA to help illegal immigrants. And then they give some people like a $750 check, and they're throwing money to the illegal immigrants, to Ukraine. Yeah.
People knew exactly who they were voting for and what they were getting, so they get what they get.
I want to talk about Mark Robinson for a second, because I think it's sort of interesting. Mark Robinson is like running an experiment, which is like, what's the floor? What's the floor for someone who's a major party nominee? in a swing state, in basically a closely done.
Remind people who he is.
Mark Robinson is the current lieutenant governor of North Carolina running for governor. He is the one who said he was called himself a Nazi at one point on the Nude Africa Forum, where he had a long set of exchanges in which he said basically every single offensive thing a person could do. He has a very, very long history of saying incredibly repellent, omnidirectionally offensive statements about just about every group imaginable. He is the opposite of what you would call like diplomatic or like
this is
political.
Like the male Rachel Maddow.
He's going to get his, you know.
He lost.
He lost, right? So he lost by a lot. He got 40%. So like to me, I look at that 40%, I think, where does everyone start in the structurally polarized America that we live in? And the answer is Mark Robinson at 40% North Carolina. Like that guy ran about as bad a race. He was abandoned by the top of the ticket. He was abandoned by fellow Republicans.
Abandoned by his entire staff.
By the entire staff. He had just about the worst news cycles you've ever seen for any candidate. And in basically what has been a 50-50 state, more or less, so it's a good experiment, that is the floor, is 40. So the reason that matters is because there's two things happening in every election. There's the structural stuff that's happening, and then there's what happens in that campaign, what the candidates are, what's happening in the news. The structural stuff in this country is like the 40%.
Yeah.
That structural stuff is moving in all sorts of interesting directions, and Steve has been talking about them. The realignment we've seen of working class voters moving from parties to the left to parties to the right, that's happened in every single OECD developed democracy across the world over the last 16
Democrats
years.
Don't represent the working man anymore.
Because of how structurally polarized we are, everything's happening at the margins. And the margins are 3 points, 4 points, 5 points. In a room of 100 people with people wearing different colored shirts, that's like 3 people changing the color of their shirt. It's 4 people changing the color of their shirt. That's where everything happens in American politics right now.
Well, and I think it goes back to what David Plouffe said there and said they built a campaign for Kamala Harris to try to defeat a Donald Trump that had a 48% ceiling. It looks like from some of what Steve Kornacki is telling us that his ceiling might have been higher this time.
Well, we talked to David exactly about that this idea that his ceiling was 46.1 or 46.7. It had always been that. And so there'll be much more time to follow this. We are following the story and the facts, and the story's not over. But if Donald Trump did increase that margin over what had been a 8-year ceiling, right, there will be much to say and much to study about whether that was because of some newfound appreciation for him and his ideas, or whether this was an economy election. And we've had many of them. And there's many a politician who will say, oh, this happened, that means you like me more, I have a bigger mandate. And sometimes it's not that. It's that high prices and inflation after COVID disruptions was a body blow to many places. And you add what you just said.
But working class voters are actually mad at everyone. They're mad at the system. They're mad at the establishment. And Democrats have thought in the last few years, listen, look at all that we've done for unions. Look what we've done for labor in this country. But we forget, not all working class voters are members of unions, right? And so there's a huge portion that correct. And I think that gets overlooked. And while we can all say, but Donald Trump does absolutely nothing for them, that's true from a policy perspective. But they look around and somehow still they feel connected with his personality. They like the way he speaks. And he speaks to them and says, you are forgotten. You know what Joe Biden did? He forgave student loan debt for college educated people who have all sorts of job opportunities. You continue to be forgotten. And so while they haven't found any policy solutions for him, and I can go through everything that Joe Biden has done from beyond what he's done with unions. We can talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. We can talk about infrastructure plans.
The Inflation Reduction Act, the most ironically named bill ever. I mean, just unbelievable. Literally, when you increase government spending, that's where you get inflation. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
We can talk about all the training programs in many of those rural communities, whether it's Georgia and Pennsylvania, but many of them aren't underway yet, and it takes time, right?
But just briefly, I'm not speaking to that. I'm just saying that when the economy is bad enough and that's front and center, people tend to vote against what they see as the incumbent party. In this case, you had an incumbent vice president. And all I'm saying, and we don't know yet, I'm just saying that is it that everyone gave Donald Trump a bigger hug because he closed so well? Again, I'm talking about the total vote. We're not issuing any new calls other than the North Carolina call Rachel just made. But in the total vote trends, is it that, or is it something we've seen from time going back to the beginning of elections, that when people are mad about the economy, they vote against the incumbent?
Or they don't vote at all, because I think we also forget that we are a 60% on a good year turnout country. There are a lot of people, especially low wealth people, this is the Bishop Barber thing he talks about all the time on our shows, is that poor and low wealth people actually don't vote for the most part. They normally sit it out. And so there's a checking out of the system and saying, I'm not receiving economic benefits. College loan forgiveness doesn't impact me. And so people are actually, in some cases in this country, backing out of voting altogether. So I think there's a tendency to think it's poor people voting against their best interests, when in many cases, poor people aren't voting at all. And so they're just not a part of the system. And so what you have is higher net worth and higher education voters voting versus rural working class voters. But just remember, working class does not mean poor. You could be working class, meaning you're a non-college voter, but you actually have, a second home somewhere in, the Hamptons, and you work in a plumbing business, and you have you're not necessarily poor. So I think we have to be careful in characterizing it as necessarily low-wage people voting against their interests and figuring out how to get them in the system at all.
Not long ago, Rita Levy-Montalcini.
I'll hop back down to Florida, where we've got a call in the abortion rights measure. In Florida, this is Amendment 4, would enshrine abortion rights in Florida. This, as you see here, has 57% yes and 43% no, but 60% is the threshold that the yes side needed to meet in Florida for the right to abortion ballot measure, the amendment to Florida's state constitution. NBC News can project that the abortion rights measure in Florida will fail. It will fall short of a 60% threshold. Finally, let's look at one governor's race. We've got a governor's race to look at in North Dakota. And the governor's race in North Dakota at this hour, NBC News is projecting as too early to call. So again, lots of calls there. I think the one that, I don't know if it qualifies as a surprise, but I think one that Democrats were hoping was within their reach here was that Florida abortion rights measure. Joy, as you were talking about earlier in detail, and Nicole as well. Again, it looks like it's going to win, to Chris's earlier point, by a very large margin, but not a large enough margin to put it over 60 points, which is what they'd need to get a yes.
Yeah, and this is the reason that Republicans wanted that 60-vote threshold, because, and as they tried to do in Ohio, Governor DeSantis has bet his political future on being the champion of denying women their rights over their own bodies. He's competing, obviously, with the governor of Texas. He's thinking about a future in which he would like to inherit Donald Trump's white evangelical base. And he's decided that this is his marker. And he's been willing to use really the awesome powers of the state to try to intimidate and bully even television stations in the state against running ads in favor of that protection. So it will defy all of the other states, including very, very red states that have protected women. Florida, in a lot of ways, it's going to be interesting. And when Stephanie's back, it will be interesting to talk about what Florida's future looks like as a place that can attract corporate headquarters and investment in a state where the governor routinely bullies companies, routinely sues companies that displease him, sued Disney, sued cruise lines, bullied schools about mask mandates,
he's just
bullies TV
stations
about what ads they can run. It's a pure Project 2025 in miniature in Florida. And that kind of extreme, sort of extremist right-wing fascist type government in Florida, does that make it a more attractive place, or does it make it more like some of the other southern states that don't get a lot of investment and interest from?
It also
particularly international investors.
That Florida, trying to be an international business hub, but also even without everything you just described, they will now continue to retain an incredibly draconian 6-week abortion ban, which is going to make it hard to persuade any large company that they should move their female staff there. Let alone any of their staff that has female.
Can I just make a
is that what it's going to do?
Is another triumph of the minority.
Well, thanks for hanging out, guys. Do me a favor, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.